The Irish Defence Force is a bit of a joke. No offence to the brave sandbags that serve in it. Our country simply just doesn't have the manpower or resources to make up a reliable standing army. Hell, I wouldn't rely on them to defend a pack of biscuits from a group of hungry children. Once again, no offence, sandbags. Just a few months ago, the door fell off an Air Corps helicopter and landed in a Dublin schoolyard below. Sounds funny, but that's actually probably our best aerial offensive manoeuvre. Another fighting force who've occasionally had their effectiveness called into question is the United Nations military. So now when I tell you the story of Ireland's first ever international military deployment under the UN, you may think you're in for a hoot. And not only is that an antiquated thing to say, it's also an incorrect thing to say, because it's actually a tale of amazing bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, with 155 Irish UN troops fending off several thousand attackers, and not a hoot in sight. In 1960, the UN launched a peacekeeping operation in the Republic of Congo after the Congo became independent from Belgium and immediately fell into civil war. That's sort of just how independence works. You can't have a good independence without a bloody civil war not too long after. A mutiny broke out in the army, violence erupted between black and white civilians, Belgium sent troops to protect their settlers, the country became a hotbed for mercenaries around the world, and a proxy war between the US and Soviet Union during the Cold War, with both sides supporting different factions. One of these factions was Katanga, a breakaway state that seceded from the Congo with Belgian support. Their leader was Moïse Tshombe, a Christian anti-communist politician. The UN's supposed aim in the Congo was to prevent it from descending into chaos as impartial peacekeepers. However, the Katangese believed the UN was not upholding this aim and was siding with their enemies, the Congolese central government, after the UN deployed forces in Katanga to combat mercenaries. As part of this operation, a contingent of 155 Irish troops under the command of 42-year-old Pat Quinlan were sent to a mining town in Katanga, Jadotville, to protect the population, largely Belgian settlers. The locals weren't happy to see the Irish though, ungrateful bastards. As I mentioned earlier, Belgium supported Katanga, and many Katanga supporters felt the UN was their enemy, so the town didn't exactly welcome the troops with open arms. In the days previous, 2 separate UN companies had withdrawn from Jadotville. Commandant Pat Quinlan sensed the hostility and had his men set up a defensive perimeter around the town. Unbeknownst to Quinlan, UN forces had taken control of a number of Katangese positions, and the Katangese were launching a counterattack. And sure enough, one day a sentry spots an attacking force of Katangese and their mercenaries descending on the town while the troops were attending mass. First mistake, never interrupt mass. The Irish love a good mass. The sentry opens up on the force, which alerts the rest of the troops, and so the Katangese had lost the element of surprise, and the Siege of Junoville had begun. The 155 Irish soldiers were only lightly armed, with some 60mm mortars and Vickers machine guns being their most devastating weaponry. The Katangese numbered over 3,000, surrounding the town and making escape impossible. As well as the local population, their forces consisted of mercenaries from Belgium, France, Rhodesia and more. Artillery rained down on Jadotville and a Katangese jet bombed the Irish, causing damage to the buildings and vehicles. So dire was the situation that the chaplain administered last rites to the troops sitting in the trenches. As the Irish returned fire on the attackers, they radioed their headquarters with the message, "We will hold out until our last bullet is spent. Could do with some whiskey." Whiskey being the Irish equivalent to Popeye's spinach. Over the next several days, the Irish troops mounted an effective counterattack with concentrated mortar and machine gun fire on identified Katangese artillery positions. They inflicted heavy casualties on the attacking force, but their supplies were running out and they desperately needed relief. The UN sent in 500 reinforcements of Irish, Swedish and Indian troops to break the siege, but the Katangese were dug in. After a series of battles which saw 3 Indians killed and a number of Irish wounded, the reinforcements were forced back. After this, the UN gave Quinlan little in the way of assistance, or even clear direction. He was largely just left to his own devices, extinguishing any hope the company might have had of getting out of this unscathed. At one point, the UN did successfully airdrop much needed water to the troops, but it had been stored in petrol containers and was undrinkable. Another classic smooth move from the UN there. Regardless, the Irish fought on, repelling wave after wave of attackers, their tenacity resulting in the deaths of around 300 Katangese, with an estimated 1,000 more injured. Reportedly, their counterattack was so successful, it caused a rout among the Katangese, with mercenary officers executing soldiers to maintain order. On the Irish side, only 5 had been injured and none were lost. After 4 days of fighting, with no more supplies and no hope of relief, Quinlan was forced to surrender. The Irish were taken prisoner and received rough treatment from their captors, but thankfully were freed after 5 weeks in exchange for Katangese prisoners. The company found itself in active combat again weeks later, but after a couple of months their tour was over and they were rotated out of combat and returned home to Ireland. Sadly, the battle was never given much recognition in Ireland. Despite inflicting heavy losses on a force many times greater than their own without losing a single man, the Irish Defence Forces regarded the surrender with shame, and the soldiers found it was best not to mention that they were involved in the Siege of Jadotville. Despite many soldiers saying they owed their lives to Pat Quinlan's tactical thinking, and Quinlan recommending a number of his men for the Military Medal for Gallantry, no soldier received any decoration for their actions during the battle. Among the veterans of the Siege of Jadotville, there have been 6 known suicides, and Pat Quinlan passed away himself at the age of 78 in 1997. Since then, surviving soldiers and families have campaigned to have the men's bravery officially recognised and their reputation restored. In 2004, an inquiry by the Defence Forces cleared Quinlan and his men of allegations of soldierly misconduct, and a commemorative stone was erected in their honour. In 2016, the government awarded a Presidential Unit Citation to the company, and in 2017, a plaque commemorating Pat Quinlan was unveiled in his native county of Kerry. And so it was. The men who had fought so valiantly had their honour upheld in the end. Katanga ended its succession in surrender in 1963. The Congo Crisis ended in 1965 after Joseph Mobutu took control of the entire country and turned it into a dictatorship. And the UN never let anyone down ever again. One of these factions was Katanga, a breakaway state that succeeded from the Congo with Belgian support. Their leader was... How the fuck do you pronounce that, lad? In all fairness.